everyone, this is Gina, and today I'm going to show you how to make a bracelet to match the Regal lace necklace and earrings that I did in my two previous tutorials. I had a request to make a full set. This is basically, just like the others, an embellished netting stitch. Now, there are several bracelets on YouTube, patterns, so on and so forth, to do a crystal embellished netted bracelet. This is just kind of my version of that particular style of bracelet. Mine is a little different with a few modifications. It will not cuff around your wrist. It doesn't curl up and cuff like the Capriccio. It has a clasp. It also has an embellishment along the top with more crystals. It's very basic other than that. And I know that I've seen it done with bicones. I've seen it done in a lot of different ways. It's a pretty basic thing. It's out there all over the place. But like I said, I had a request and I didn't want to do what everyone else has done exactly because that would be copying and I don't want to do that. So this is just my version. There are fireworks going on outside, so I apologize for that. It's somebody's Christmas celebration, I guess. This is what it looks like on the inside. With this one, I just used some check hex cut beads. I will be using a different 11-0 seed bead to match the rest of my set that I made for the other tutorials today. So I will show you what you need to get started with this, and then we'll start with the netting. Okay, for your main netting, you will need an 11-0 seed bead and an 8-0 seed bead. I'm using an 11-0 Toho seed bead. It's galvanized silver, and that's because it's what I've been using in the rest of my crystal set that I made for the Regal lace, and I want this one to somewhat match, so I'm using that again. And an 8-0 seed bead. I ran out of the one I used in the other two pieces, in the earrings and the necklace, so I'm using something similar. This is kind of a gray, silvery, purple lined check bead. And it's an 8-0, of course. For my embellishment, you will need 3mm round crystals. I'm using an opal finish because that's what I have. It's a clear with an opal finish. That's what I used in the rest of my set. And you will need somewhere around 300. I can't tell you the exact amount because that'll depend upon your length of bracelet. However, I would not start with anything less than 300 just to make sure. And if you have extra, you can always make the earrings in the Regal lace set. How's that for shameless self-promotion, huh? Yeah. Okay. Then you will need another color of 11-0 seed bead for your embellishment. I'm using a silver lined amethyst check seed bead. And you will need a 2x3 crystal roundel. I am using also an opaly, or maybe it's just an AB finished clear crystal. You will need a 4-strand bar clasp. This is a silver plated 4-strand. And you will need a beading needle, 8 or 6 pound Fireline, and you will start with 2 wingspans of that. You will have to add on to it several times, so you will need quite a bit of Fireline. So make sure you have that on hand. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you the basic netting stitch that we will need to do for our frame of our necklace. I'm going to start by threading onto my thread a 3 or 4 millimeter pearl just for a stop bead. I'm just going to bring it to the end of my thread and go through it again. Now leave about a 6 to 8 inch tail, at least. 8 inch would probably be better. I don't like to work with like an inch when I'm trying to sew it back through, so I like to have 6 to 8 inches at least. Sometimes I leave more. I'm not using 2 wingspans right now just for the sake of not having to pull a lot of thread through while I show you, but that's really what you should start with. And like I said, you will have to add more, so once before I have mentioned to watch the Joining Fireline video on YouTube. It's called Joining Fireline for bead weaving. It will be very helpful for you if you watch that. That way you can extend your thread without having to tie on. Okay, so we're going to start with an 8/0, 2 11/0s, 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 an 8/0. We're going to do this until we have 9 8/0s on our needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I need another 8/0, 2 more 11/0s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. I'm going to bring them down a little bit. I'm going to add another 8/0 and 2 11/0s. So basically, you are going to have on your needle, on your thread, whichever, you're going to make sure you have 9 8/0s. You're going to start at when you very first started, at the very end, you're going to have an 8/0, and you're going to end up with 2 11/0s. So let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's right. So you will start with an 8/0, end up with 2 11/0s, making sure that there are 9 8/0s on the thread. Pull it down to the end. And then we are just going to sew back up through. Get you close here. We're going to count 1, 2, 3, and we're going to go up the third 8/0. And we're going to sew through it. And that's what you should have. And that is the very beginning of our netted stitch. Now we have to finish it out by adding, we will always add 2 11/0s, an 8/0, and 2 11/0s. And we will skip one 8/0 and go into the next one. And then again, we will pick up 2 11/0s, an 8/0, and 2 11/0s. We will skip one 8/0 and go into the next. And then one more time, we will pick up 2 11/0s, an 8/0, and 2 11/0s. And we will go up, just move your stop bead aside and go up through the top 8/0 and pull. And this is what you should have. I'm going to turn it around so you can see it the right direction. Go out just a little tiny bit. And now we are going to continue doing the same thing, but we are only going to go into the outside beads. They're kind of sticking out. The ones that are joining, that look like a little waistline, those we will not go into. We will just go into the outside ones, the ones sticking out. So we will pick up 2 11s, an 8/0, and 2 11s, and go into our next 8/0. And pull it through. And again, 2 11s, an 8/0, and 2 11s. Dropped an 11. And then I will skip this one that looks like a little waist and I will go into the next 8-0. This is easier if you're just holding it in your hand instead of laying it on the table. It's not difficult at all. It's just a little awkward for me trying to keep my hands out of the way here. Try not to twist and turn your thread. Mine is twisting and turning a little simply because of the position I'm working in. And then again, 2 11-0s and an 8-0 and 2 11-0s. Down through the next 8-0. And pull. And then again, 2 11-0s, an 8-0, and 2 11-0s. Then we will go down into our very bottom 8-0 and pull. Now we need to space and come up, so we're going to pick up 2 11-0s. It's always 2 11-0s, an 8-0, and 2 11-0s. Once you get your first and second little lines done of them, it's really easy. It's very obvious and very difficult to goof up unless you don't pick up an 11-0 or an 8-0 or something, and you will see it if that happens, because it's just very obvious. This is one of the simpler netting stitches you can do. Just the same thing over and over and over again. So 2 11-0s, an 8-0, and 2 11-0s. And come up through the sticking out 8-0 and pull. And you don't have to keep it tremendously tight, but you don't want any thread showing, so just kind of make sure everything's in place nice. 2 11-0s, an 8-0, 2 11-0s. Up through the next sticking out 8-0. Two 11-0s, an 8-0, and 2 11-0s, and then back up through the 8-0 on the very top. And now we want to make our little space here, and it's the same thing. 2 11-0s, an 8-0, and 2 11-0s. And then down into the next 8-0. And pull. And if it pulls apart like that, just tighten it back up. And then 2 11-0s, an 8-0, and 2 11-0s. Down into the next 8-0. Two 11-0s, an 8-0, and 2 11-0s. And then into the next 8-0. And of course again, 2 11-0s, an 8-0, 2 11-0s. Down into the next 8-0. And we're just going to continue doing that. Just picking up 2 11-ohs and an 8-oh and 2 11-ohs, and just continue making netting until you get to the length of your wrist. Now my wrist is a 7-inch wrist, so I will always make my netting to be exactly 6.5 inches, because it will take an inch of room by the time we attach our clasp. So, and I like a little bit of movement in my bracelets. So I like to leave at least an inch between the size I want. And I want a 1/2 inch of movement also. So if I want my bracelet to be 7.5 inches, I stop at 6.5 inches. If your wrist is 6 inches, you will stop at 5 inches. So just continue netting until you get exactly 1 inch smaller than the length that you want. And then we will be back. Okay, so you can see my netting is done. It's just right at 6.5 inches, since I want a 7.5 inch bracelet. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to secure our netting by taking off our stop bead, sewing in our tail, and just getting rid of our tail, and make sure that our netting is not going to fall apart at all. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. Take your needle off of the working thread, and then thread your needle onto your tail. Once you have done that, then you will need to pick up an 8-oh onto your needle. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do. Let's get really close here. Right at the end where your tail is coming out, right on top of this 8-oh, we are going to bring another 8-oh down on the top here. And then we are going to go back through the 8-oh beneath it and the 11-ohs. So just slide down until you're coming out of the second 8-oh. Now it has a tendency to pull apart. Just pull it back together. We're going to want this 8-oh to stand up, and our next step will do that. But at this point, just kind of make sure that the thread is on the bottom of it like this. And it's just kind of, whoops, that's too close. And it's just kind of laying there. And then we are going to sew through this netting area all the way down with our tail and just knot it off. So let's go all the way down. Through the netting. When we get to the end, instead of just knotting off, like I said, we are going to add another 8-oh. Grab a hold of it. Now you can either sew directly into the 11-ohs, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to sew back down into the 8-oh. And the 8-oh beneath the second 8-oh here. So then I'm just going to work my way back into the bead some more. And at this point I'm on the I'm tangling my thread is what I'm doing. I'm about the third bead in, so I am going to go into my main netting now and go through a few beads and tangle my thread again. Now I'm going to grab the thread between the 8/0 and the 11/0 here and tie a 1/2 inch knot and just make sure that it goes between my beads. And sew back through a little bit. And we go back this way again. Doesn't really matter where you go, just follow your original thread path. I'm going to go back up through this top 8/0 since I can't go back down without doing that. And just sew through. Don't make this confusing. I know it looks confusing. It's really not. We're just adding 2 8/0s at the end and just sew through and tie off. I'm going to tie another 1/2 inch knot between the 11/0 and the 8/0. Make sure that my thread ties between the two beads and go back down again. Now when you feel like you have it pretty secure on this end, that it's not going to fall apart, go through the body of your netting a little bit. These square edges, I'm always catching my thread on. Okay, through the body a little bit, and then we will just cut it off. Okay, so this is what we have. We've just added 2 little 8/0s onto our tail. We've secured the end, so now that we've taken our stop bead off, nothing's going to fall apart, nothing's going to get loose. We're just prepared for our next step. We are now going to pick up our working thread and rethread our needle with it. And we're going to pick up an 8/0 seed bead. Again, we are coming out right here with our working thread. So we're going to go back down through the 8/0. We have an 8/0 on our needle. I'm going to go back down through the 8/0 in the very end here. Pull my thread, get my beads tight. And basically do the same thing, except for it's a little simpler because we're just going to sew down to the end. So we're going to go through all of these beads. But don't go through your 8/0 way down at the bottom there. That's not going to work. Okay. Back into beads. And just keep sewing till you get to the very last 8/0. And just stay on this very last row. Don't work into the body of your netting. and then come out through the top 8-0 right here. And again, grab an 8-0 with your needle and drop it down. Now we are going to place an 8-0 between all the spaces between these 11 O's on the top. So now that we have an 8-0 just kind of laying loose here, we are just simply going to, instead of sewing down through our work, we're just going to sew into the next two 11 O's. And we're going to pull it up tight next to them. And it's on there now. So now we're just going to take some 11 O's, or not 11 O's, I'm sorry, 8 O's, and we're going to place them between each of the two 11 O spaces. So I'm just going to put my needle through the next two 11 O's and pop an 8-0 right between them. Make sure that you don't pull incredibly tight where you bunch your netting, but make sure that the 8-0 is nice and seated between the two. You don't want it to be thready or floppy or sticking out funny or anything. It needs to lie right in there. And you can give it just a little tug just to make sure that the end one is nice. And at this point you should be able to just slide between the 11 O's and not really worry too much about the tension on the end here. We're going to work the entire length, adding 8 O's. So go ahead and do that when you get to the very end. I will show you what we'll do to get to the other side to do the same thing. Okay, so I have sewn all the way the length of my bracelet, adding an 8-0 between the 11 O's where there's spaces, and now I'm to the very last space, so I am going to pick up an 8-0 and I'm going to slide through the 8-0 we added on the very end, and this is what it should look like. Now I'm going to sew down into the 8-0 beneath the 8-0 we just added, and I am going to go down into the third 8-0 in my netting and go through it and come out the other side. Now I want to make sure that I'm in the center 4 beads here because I'm going to add my clasp. And I want to add it to 4 beads. Since I have a 4 strand, I want to make sure I'm right in the center. So I'm going to use this bead, this bead, this bead, and this bead. So I'm going to grab my bar clasp. I'm going to leave it together, of course, so that we don't get confused on what side is what and do it upside down and all that weird stuff. So I want to start with the bead that I'm coming out of. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick up an 8-0. I'm going to drop it down to the end of my thread, and I'm going to go through my bar clasp and then back through the 8-0 that we added, and then back through the opposite side that we came out of originally of the 8-0 seed bead in the bracelet itself. So I'm going to go through this side right here, and basically I'm just making a loop, just going into the 8-0 on top and around and back through. And yes, there will be a little bit of thread on the outside of the 8-0 in the bracelet, but by the time we're done in embellishing and such, you won't even see it, so don't worry about that. Now we're going to go back up through the bar clasp and the 8-0, back down into the 8-0 we added, and back down into the 8-0 in the bracelet. And we're going to do that for each bar. You'll sew down, after you're done with this, you'll sew down into the next one, do exactly the same thing, add an 8-0 and sew through it. And you will want to sew through the clasp and the 8/0 at least 4 times. You want it to be strong. I'm using 8-pound Fireline. That's pretty strong. But on a bracelet, your clasp gets pulled quite a bit. So you can sew through it as many times as you want. If the thread starts getting too thick and you can't go through it anymore, then you need to stop. But you can go to that point. So go ahead and do that. Add it all the way until you're done adding it on the 4th clasp, and we'll come back. Or the 4th ring, I mean. Alright, so I'm back. I have sewn through my bar clasp, adding an 8/0 and sewing through the 4 center 8/0s in my body of work on the very last row of my netting until it's very secure. And I'm coming out of this 8/0 right here, and I'm just going to sew again through the 11/0s. And as you probably noticed, as you sew, the first 11/0 is hard to pick up next to the 8/0 that you sewed your clasp in, but you can get it. You just have to kind of struggle with it for a second. And then we're just going to work our way up to the end, out the 11/0s, and then back up through the 8/0 on the very bottom here. And now we're in position. We're going to slide through the 8/0 on top that we added when we tied off, and we are going to go into the first 2 11/0s on our top here. And again, we are going to add an 8/0 between every space on this side of the bracelet between the 11/0s. So we're going to pick up an 8/0 and then go into the next 2 11/0s and pull. And we're just going to continue picking up an 8/0 and sliding through the next 2 11/0s. All the way till we get to the end of the bracelet again. And then I will show you what to do. Okay, so now I have added the little 8/0 bead all along the length on the other side, and I've come out the little 8/0 seed bead that we added earlier. So I'm coming out right here. I've extended my Fireline, so I have a little tiny joint in my Fireline here. So as I sew down, it might pull a little bit, but usually you can just pull it through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew back down into this 8/0 and down into this bead here. I'm going to look for my 4 center beads and come out through the center bead that I need to start my clasp on. So let me go down into this 8/0 here and through the 11/0s. Get as far as I can here. And then I'm going to continue through this 11/0 and down into my 8/0. And this is where the little Fireline joint can get a little picky. There we go. So now that I am coming out of this 8/0 right here, I am going to pick up another 8/0 and drop it down. And then I'm going to bend my clasp over, and I'm going to grab a hold of the top loop here, Then I'm going to go back down through the 8-0 I just added, and then through the opposite side of the 8-0 from the side I came out of originally. Go through the opposite side and pull. And now I'm just going to separate my clasp. And now we are going to secure the clasp on just like we did the other side. After you've secured this 8-0 to this 8-0, sew down. Make sure you're coming out the direction so that you can sew down into the next 8-0. Add another 8-0, sew into your clasp, and repeat that until you've done it 4 times, and we will be back. Alright, so now I have sewn through and attached my clasp to all 4 of the center 8-0 seed beads on the opposite end of the clasp from the one we had done first, of course. And then I'm right here coming out of this seed bead, out of this 8-0, right here, because after I attached to this seed bead, I sewed up through the 2 11-0s and the 8-0. And now I'm going to sew up through these 2 11-0s into this 8-0. We are going to start our embellishment with crystals and our embellishment seed beads. So get out your other color of 11-0 seed beads and get them ready, as well as your crystals. And let's go up through this 8-0 here. And then the little top 8-0 that we added when we were doing our step and tying on our end. Let's go up through it. We're going to get ourselves in a position where we can start to embellish. And we are going to embellish starting here. So we need to sew through these 2 seed beads and this 8-0 right here. So we are going to sew through the 2 little 11-0s and the next 8-0. We are now going to start filling in the little triangles with our embellishment. So we're going to sew through the 8-0 into the necklace, the one right beneath the 8-0 and the top that you are coming out of. Pull your thread through. Now we are going to use our embellishment beads. So I've got a little pile of my embellishment 11-0 and my crystals. And so we are going to start, I'm not really going to worry about focusing on the beads. We are going to start our embellishment by picking up an 11-0, a crystal, and an 11-0. And we are going to sew now from this seed bead down to this seed bead. So we're just going to go right through this next seed bead, right through this 8-0, and pull our crystal and 11-0s that are on our thread into place. Just like that. And we're going to do that again. 11-0, crystal, 11-0. And we're coming out of this seed bead, we're going to go into this 8-0 seed bead. And pull. And then again, we're going to go from this 8-0 to this 8-0 here. So we're going to pick up an 11-0, a crystal, and an 11-0. And we are going to go down into this seed bead, but we are also, turn my work here, we are also going to go into these 2 11-0s so we can work our way up to this top seed bead on the outside of our bracelet here. So we're going to go through sorry, got a tangle. There we go. So now we are coming out of this little 8-0 on top, right here. We are going to go into the 8-0 above it. This is how we are going to anchor our next line of embellishments. So go through one side of the 8-0 on the top. You're coming out the opposite side now, and you're going to go right back down into the 8-0 seed bead you just came out of. So basically, you've just turned around. And you're going to pick up your embellishment beads again, your 11-0, your crystal, and your 11-0, and go right back into the next 8-0 seed bead and pull. And again, pick up an 11-0, a crystal, and 11-0, and then into the next 8-0. And again, 11-0, crystal, 11-0, and into the next 8-0. Now we are going to sew into the next two 11-0s and the 8-0 at a diagonal here. Come up through into the 8-0 on top, and then back down into the 8-0 right that we just came out of. And again, pick up your embellishment, 11-0, crystal, 11-0, and into the next 8-0. 11-0, crystal, 11-0, and into the next 8-0. Crystal, 11-0, into the next 8-0, and then up into the next two 11-0s and the 8-0 right beneath the top 8-0. Go through the top 8-0, back down into the 8-0 you just came out of, and again add your embellishment. Now I'm noticing on this particular bracelet I have some little openings on the side here. I may decide in the end to go back and embellish them. I'm using a larger 11-0, I'm using a Toho than the check hex that I had used in my original design, and it's turned out a little bit differently. And if that happens, when you very first start, just go ahead and fill in those two spaces. But at this point, I'm just going to continue with my original design and see how it looks by the time I get done. I may decide to do something else with it, and that's all a personal choice. Basically, the pattern will work perfectly fine without doing that. So now I'm coming out of this 8-0 here, and I'm going to go down into the next. Pick up an 11-0, a crystal, an 11-0, and then down into the next 8-0. And this is basically what you will do for the entire length of the bracelet. Just continue to embellish it. You won't worry about the very top loops here or here. You will come only to the very top of the 8-0s that match up with the 8-0 embellishment on top. Do not worry about the spaces in between. That's actually part of the design of this bracelet. And when we put our little fringe embellishment on the top of our smaller crystals, that will blend right in. So don't worry about trying to fill the spaces at the very top. Just go all the way to the top where the 8-0 meets the 8-0. Okay, so I'm not quite half through, but I thought I'd show you how the bracelet starts to curve and puff out. And that's what you want. That's not a bad thing. So if that's happening at this stage, that's good. And now I'm going to continue the rest of my embellishment, and we will come back. Okay, so I am back. I have finished my embellishment except for my very last crystal that I need to add, and then I will show you how I'll travel up to the top to do the embellishment on the top of the bracelet. Let's get in closer here. Okay, so I am coming out of this seed bead right here. I'm going to go up through my next 8 and then into, at a diagonal as we've been doing, over to the last 8-0 on the very corner of the bracelet here. Now we've already sewn through it a couple times adding it and such, so it's a little difficult to get into. Just kind of push your way up through and pull your thread through. Tighten your embellishment down, and then just rearrange my piece here. Just sew through this 8-0 right here. Now we are going to use our little 2x3 crystal roundels. And one good note with my other crystals, at the beginning of the video, I said to start with no less than 300. Well, I started with 200 in my dish and I still have 20. So again, I miscalculated. So I would say to start with at least 200, maybe a little bit more if you're going for a really long length. But mine is a 7.5 inch bracelet, and I used right at 180. So I would say start with 200. Now with these little 2x3 crystals, I'm starting with 100. I don't think I'll use 100, but I'm starting with 100 and we'll see how many I have left. So put a little 2x3 crystal rondelle on your needle, then go into the next 8-0 and pull. Just kind of line it up between the two. And then grab another and go into the next 8-0. Pull tight. I'm going to pop them down in between there. And then grab another and go into the next 8-0. Very simple embellishment. And then another and into the next. And we'll do this the entire length of the bracelet. When we get to the end on the top here, I'll show you how to travel down to the other side. So just continue doing that through the whole length of the top of your bracelet here. Okay, so I have finished adding my crystal all the way the entire length of my bracelet. I am now coming out of the little end 8-0, and I have decided that I want to put a little embellishment in this little open space here. So I'm going to sew down into the 8-0 beneath here, maybe. It's getting a little thread tight, so I'm going to pull this through with my straight nose. And I'm going to pick up an 11-0 and a 3mm crystal, or a 4mm crystal and 11-0. And then I'm going to come down through the 8-0 that I have anchored my clasp to, my very first 8-0. And then I am just going to sew. I'm going to move over. I'm not going to sew through these two 11-0s where my clasps are. I'm not sure I will get through my clasp real well that way, or the ones that I have sewn the clasp through already. So I'm going to move over to the next 11 rows and sew through. And then I'm going to sew through the 2 11 rows here again. And I am going to have to come up through the 8 row that I have my clasp attached to. And then I'm going to pick up another embellishment just for this little opening here. This is going to fill in my bracelet a little bit more. We can do that. You can do this at the very beginning instead of skipping those 2 spots like we did when we started our embellishment. You can fill these in at that time. However, this has a lot to do with the way I sewed my clasp on and kind of moved through my work, holding it at funny angles and such. Sometimes I get my work a little twisted. So it may not even be an issue. But I find that this looks a little bit better here. So now I want to add I'm coming out of this 8 row here. I'm going to sew up and get to this 8 row on top here so that I can start putting my roundels on the top here. So I'm just going to sew through. And then just look at your work when you get done with your embellishment across the top. And if it looks like you need a couple more, just sew where you need to. Just follow your thread path and sew in and add a couple more if you need to. On my first design, I didn't need to do that. But my beads were smaller and the openings did not show as much. Okay, so now I'm coming out of this 8 row on top. And I'm going to start with my roundels the same way we did on the other side. Pull it nice and tight. That'll kind of pull this last 8 row into place. And add your next one. And just slide a roundel between each 8 row like you did on the other side, all the way the length of the bracelet. And then you will sew down and add your embellishments in your open spots if you want to at the other end of the bracelet and tie off. And when we get all done doing that, I'll come back and show you what the entire set looks like, what the finished thing looks like. Alrighty then, I have finished my entire embellishment on the bottom and on the top with my crystal, and I sewed back through. I added a couple on the ends here, just like I did on the other side on film, and then went to the inside of my piece of work and tied off. I just sewed through the pattern, the existing thread path, and tied off. After you have finished your entire bracelet, just kind of work your fingers around on the inside and just kind of spread the netting out and even everything out. Kind of get the thread situated inside so that it doesn't want to collapse and cave and do strange things. Once you do that, then it stands up nice and it wears nice. Looks really good. So I just wanted to give you that little hint. Just go through with your thumbs and just push the netting apart a little bit and let everything situate into place. This is what it looks like on. And this is what the attachment for the clasp looks like. And then I will show you the entire set. And this is what the entire set looks like together. Quite an impressive set, I would say, wouldn't you? Thank you very much for watching my video, and I hope you try all 3 pieces. It's really a very fun set to do. Bye-bye.